Hello again. This is Father Ken saying hello to all of our parishioners here in the greater Medford area and in Jacksonville as we begin our Advent journey. I'm here in the office just giving a coronavirus update. So although it's Tuesday now, I'm posting this Sunday message for those who weren't able to join us for that first Sunday of Advent. This is essentially the message that I focused on this week. In part, first, I repeated something I said Saturday morning, this past Saturday, having to do with one basic principle that is commonly taught when it comes to homiletics or preaching. If you were to stop in and visit a preaching class in a seminary somewhere in the U.S., at some point in introductory class, they would say something like this to you in regard to what is the goal of good preaching. It would be to afflict the comfortable and to comfort the afflicted. It's easier said than done, but that is the challenge. If someone is experiencing a particularly challenging weight of the cross, to try to give them encouragement and give them hope. And for the one who thinks they have nothing to work on, to try and sting their heart a little bit, to maybe take a second look in the mirror and see where it is we need to focus on growing. I suggested that as a possible explanation for some of the critiques I've heard recently about Pope Francis. A number of people have brought to me the observation that it doesn't seem like Pope Francis likes the United States very much. And I, frankly, myself have made that observation. But it may well be this. It may be that when Pope Francis looks through his lens at the world, and considering that principle that I've just given you, maybe he sees the poorest of the poor in the third world as those who are afflicted, who need comforting. And he looks at the United States and sees the comfortable, whether you agree or not with that assessment. I think that is at least in part why some of his communications come off the way they do. At any rate, it's the task given to each preacher, and we use whatever gifts we have, whatever personality gifts we have to try and achieve that. But I made the point that even if we fail, even if every preacher in the world were to just mail it in and do a terrible job of opening up the Word, the living Word itself has that ability to afflict the comfortable and to comfort the afflicted. Whether we want to receive that or not, it happens. Sometimes you hear the Word, and if we're not living according to God's law, it stings our conscience. It makes us think a little more deeply. Sometimes when we're at the end of our rope, we can hear a word that gives us hope to just hang on, to keep going. An example I gave was from Saturday morning's liturgy, why I started back with my Saturday message, because the reading leading up to the start of first Sunday of Advent were three words uttered by the prophet from God. It was, "I am coming." Now, if you are struggling under persecution or ill health or extreme poverty, and you're losing your will to live, and you're wondering if you have the strength even to get up the next day and face one more day of struggle, hearing the words, "I am coming," from God are a comfort. However, if you are not living as you're called to live according to God's law, if you're not striving for holiness, to hear those words may well set you in a panic. They might act as an affliction. It's like the example I gave on Sunday was, if you're a teenager and your parents are going to be away for the weekend and they tell you to look after the house, and instead you decide to have a secret party with your friends, and you trash the house a little bit, do some property damage, and suddenly you hear your parents have come home early, you're not going to receive that message with great joy. Or if you're a student acting up in class and someone tells you the principal's coming down the hall, you may well be filled with anxiety at those words rather than calm. An example I thought of since Sunday was a real one that happened to me. It was a week in which my housekeeping was not at its very best, and I hadn't been checking my text messages on my phone because um, it was just a busy, hectic day. And all of a sudden, I realized that my sister in Salem had sent me 3 or 4 text messages, and the first one said, "We're free today, so we thought we'd drive down to Medford to see you." And then the next one after that was, "Well, we're just about an hour away. We just passed Grants Pass." And the next one after that says, "Okay, we just got to the city limits of Medford." and and the last one was something like, "We're outside. Where are you?" And I hadn't had time to clean my house and prepare for guests, and it was disastrous, the level of panic that I felt. We don't want to have that kind of experience when it comes to our spiritual life. So the first message of the Advent season is when you consider the end goal and the core message that God is coming, our King is coming, let's try to make sure that we're living in such a way that that is a word of consolation to us and not a word of affliction. One of the ways that we can succeed in that, I think, is a thing that was brought up by Bishop Robert Barons. And Bishop Barons said that if we want to really enter into the emotional space of Advent in the way it was intended, with a kind of a vigilance, with a kind of urgent longing, with a kind of long-suffering patience, we have to first begin by recognizing that we are in need of a Savior. If we're praying for the Savior to come, but we don't believe that we need saving, we won't have that kind of joyful anticipation. We won't have that sense of urgency. We won't be able to connect with that Spirit at all. And he pointed out that at times there are things that happen in our life that cause us to be off the mark when it comes to that sense of needing a Savior. The one that he gave as an example was being spiritually lost. I have a terrible sense of direction, so I'm glad I live in the age now of GPS. Particularly as a priest, I get called a lot to go to houses or places I've never been before to anoint people, and a lot of times there's time pressure, there's a sense of urgency. And under the old system, I would have had to scratch down a few notes, and inevitably I would get lost. And a lot of times it's after hours in the dark, and you just hopefully look anywhere for a responsible looking neighbor who might be able to direct you when you can't make it that last bit of the way. And the panic comes upon you if you lose your way. You realize, I don't even know how to correct my situation. I don't know whether to go north, south, east, or west here. GPS eliminates that. You just look at the screen and keep turning as it tells you to turn. But if we could at least try to reimagine, if we're spiritually lost, kind of reacquire that sense of panic of, I know I left the road somewhere, and I don't know where I am right now. I don't know how I got off track, and I don't know how to get back on track, frankly. Please help me, Lord. That is the kind of urgency that I think captures the Advent spirit. So that's one. Just become aware again if we've lost our way, that we're lost and we need some directions to save us. The second one is when we allow ourselves to become hard of heart. I think that's a real problem this year in 2020, because most of what's happened to us, if we're an average citizen, it's beyond our control. We see civil unrest, we see political unrest, we see coronavirus restrictions, we see Alameda fire. All this stuff brings chaos into our life, a lack of structure, and a lot of times our reaction to that helpless feeling of just being a victim and having things happen to us is anger. We want to direct it at someone. We want to blame someone. We want to point a finger. And eventually, if we let that anger consume us, we start to little by little lose a sense of empathy for other people's suffering. We grow cold. In the end of the first reading this weekend, it talked about us being like clay for the potter. That means kind of remaining docile, remaining malleable, being able to be formed. But if you let your heart grow hard like a rock, God can't come into your life. So we need to reacquire that sense of being vulnerable, being allowed to be formed in God's hands as the potter. um, in order to make our way back, because uh, through his hands, he can transform our heart and shape us into something else. The last detail we observed was God's anger, that when we look and see that we are a sinner, as the reading said, and recognize that God is angry with that, it's important to note he's angry at the effects of sin. He's angry at the existence of evil in the world, I think, more than he's angry at us. He's love. He's merciful when he looks at you, but he can't help but have a righteous anger toward the kind of sin that deforms us, that holds us back from becoming the person he created us to be. And so we need to get in touch with that side of us, the side that is a sinner, that area where we're doing the things we do not want to do. We had a good long lines this Saturday, starting off the Advent season in the right way. Many people came back, so we had thankfully a return to those lines as people wanted to tend to that piece. It's a very important piece of the journey. This year, by the way, we won't be having reconciliation services as we had in the past due to coronavirus, so we urge you to really tend to that, but either by appointment in our office or come to one of our Saturday scheduled days for confession. Don't miss that opportunity to confront the areas of sin that are still in our life. So recognize that we are lost in some ways, that our heart has grown cold and hard by the circumstances, and that, as a result of that, we've become, at least in some respects, not the kind of person we wish we were. That's where we have to have a sense of honesty and to confront that and invite our Savior to come back into that space and change us. We ask God's help with that, and we again pray for the grace to act with this kind of wisdom, so that that welcoming of our King on Christmas is a consolation to us and not an affliction. God bless you, and have a great week until we talk again next week.